Okay, great. All right. Go ahead.
I'm up in the attic of my house, which we've been trying to restore to its 1887 glory, but we haven't got to the attic yet, so it still looks like an attic.
I think you've appeared on the show multiple times from the attic, so I think we're all used to it by now.
Yes, it's.
Will we see you in a finished attic? When is that going to happen?
There might be a little bit more work this winter.
Okay.
Our contractor makes most of his money pouring concrete for area farmers and businesses, trucking companies, and that sort of thing. So we're kind of a side hustle for him. I mean, one might say, well, why do you put up with that? Well, the thing is, he is an amazing craftsman. And the only guy we've ever found who can recreate woodwork to look like it's from 130 years ago.
That's why you need to have an in-demand skill, right? And this is a good lesson.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Be a plumber.
I do want to ask you about that, and maybe at the end of the show. But first of all, welcome everyone back. Of course, the illustrious Professor Bob Gjerdingen. We wanted to shoot a Christmas episode, but we got a little bit sidetracked because just people are falling ill a lot in December. Not just everyone. It's just even in Singapore, I'm seeing people are hacking up lungs, and it's really terrible.
Oh, absolutely. We went to Puerto Rico to find some warmth, and instead we found COVID.
Oh no! Sorry. Well, anyway.
Go ahead.
We change this now to a New Year episode, and I think it'll still be just as good. So, well, let's do a little update. I mean, there was a tremendous large conference pretty recently, right, Professor Gjerdingen? And I just want to show a screen cap from it. It was attended by many prominent figures in the Partimento community and historical pedagogy, and packed, and so many people giving great presentations. Could you speak a little bit about it?
Oh, yes. It was really amazing. First of all, the last time I was at the Hochschule in Vienna was 54 years ago. And I was accompanying a tenor who sang a famous song called Wien, Wien, Only You Are the Stuff of My Dreams. Well, so anyway, that was a long, long time ago. And the Hochschule was still a famous institution, but it has grown. It has a campus with multiple buildings, 3,000 students. I mean, its early music department is as big as some music schools. It's really quite amazing. And the faculty are world-class, the students. It's entirely international. I think Austrians are probably the minority.
Wow. This is like the Academy Award. It's so big. I just figured this is quite an event, right? A significant event, because I mean, Partimento, I mean, the name Partimento right there in the title of the conference, and attended by tons of people. I mean, it's almost mainstream in pedagogy.
Yeah, well, speaking as someone to whom a recent head of the American Musicological Society had once approached and said, "What the hell is a printer?" So, having lived through that era, this was just gobsmacking. The people who were there were very knowledgeable. And it was a mix of performers, high-level performers, and scholars like I'd really never seen before. I mean, I do believe there are such gatherings frequently. I mean, Oberlin has an early
Mm.
music gathering that's very important annually. But this was really something. I think this was a critical mass having been reached.
Yeah. And I mean, you just mentioned that anecdote from the past where people are flummoxed by some of the new terms, but everyone is using terms like printer. Everyone is talking about these terms. It must be quite astonishing, right? To I mean, just to notice that this is part of the lexicon now.
Yes, and I think the only credit I can take is having seen some things, heard some things that at the end of the day we might say are just plain obvious, right? I mean, well, I'll give you an example. I was kind of going through my file of some solfeggio manuscripts that I was looking at.
Okay, so Professor Gjerdingen, you sent me a bunch of solfeggio images and manuscripts. Can you talk about this one? You were just talking about solfeggi a second ago.
Yes, I was reviewing some of the questions that your viewers had submitted, and you know they had there were various things about concept of schemas and whatever. When it's going on 40 years ago that I started working. I mean, it's actually over 40 years ago that I started working on this idea. And the schema concept comes from cognitive psychology, especially cognitive psychology of the 1970s and 80s. And it was a way to try and, for psychologists, it was a way to try and get beyond the difficulties of what we might call classical or Aristotelian classification. Okay. Going back 2,000 years and more, there was this idea that a category is defined by a list of features. So I think, what was it? Mankind, a human is a bipedal something or another. Well, it turns out that when cognitive psychologists started working on experiments to see how people actually categorize things, they found that lists of features didn't work at all. It was a terrible problem. The instances of things vary continuously in many different ways all the time. And yet people don't seem to have trouble categorizing things. I mean, we don't look at something and say, well, could that really be a chair? Maybe it's not really a chair. It looks a little bit like a chair. We just immediately say, oh, that's a chair. Okay, well, I think for one reason that people never seem to have caught on, other than intuitively, I will say that. I mean, great performing musicians have amazing intuitions about the structure of music, and always have had. But on the academic side, how is it possible for people never to catch on that there are printers in the world or Romanesque openings? I mean, it's just so obvious when you see them, but they don't work very well if you're making up a list of features. So, for example, a printer that starts on the 6th scale degree of a key is not going to have the same list of features as a printer that starts on the 3rd scale degree of a key and is going to be solfegged in the dominant, if you will. So if you have, and at the same time you have, let's say you put Roman numerals under these things. Well, then they're entirely different. But they're not entirely different. They're almost indistinguishable. It's just there's a different keynote. So anyway, once you change the rules And instead of list of features, you have similarity, perceived similarity. Then things open up quite a bit. Okay. The other day, I opened up a set of 18th century solfeggi, and it's this one by Mazzoni.
Okay.
And let me just play the opening of it. I'll play it a little faster than it's written.
Oh, Matsu.
Okay, it starts out with a Galant Romanesco opening. It could go, or it could go, different set of features, but they fit within the schema. And then a crystal clear printer. But is it really crystal clear? The first part, there are appoggiaturas on both the C and the B. So you would have to change a list of features a long way to make that fit. And then the next one is much worse. This is a modulating printer. Not at all clear. And yet, in the context of a piece like this, a modulating printer after a standard printer is very common, and you sort of expect it. And then if you look at the bass, and it's there, but good luck defining that through a list of features. So these patterns are just everywhere in this music. 30, 40 years ago, I wondered, am I just seeing this? You know, I'm suffering from, schema derangement syndrome. But fortunately, other people started noticing these things. And for example, James Simmons did a statistical analysis of Neapolitan solfeggi where nothing is taken for granted. I mean, other than the key number of a pitch and its duration. I mean, nothing is put into the program about printers or anything like that. And sure enough, after pure repetition, the printer is the most common pattern in that whole repertoire. And in fact, all the music in the Galant style, isochronous patterns, in other words, the patterns that occur at equal time intervals, they all showed up very high on the list.
Professor Gjerdingen, this is a good, just a question that I just thought of, which is, you actually, people would be surprised, but you worked with computers for a very long time, early in your career. What do you make what do you make of AI now, which is really all the rage? And for music education, surely a computer, I don't know if you've played around with a ChatGPT, but for instance, it's quite powerful. I mean, like, for instance, chess is solved by computers essentially. Chess is like at the highest levels. No human can compete with a computer. But for education, plugging in data of printers, schema, all these things, what's the implication of that for music education? Can we gain something from this? Can we learn composition better with computers? What's your take on this?
Okay. Um, I I go back a long way. I mean, the first computer program I did relating to music involved punch cards. You, you know, we're we're talking about IBM mainframes, uh, I mean, the first program I did related to music was run on a computer at the University of Hawaii that had been purchased to do sonar research for the Navy. We could only dream of personal computers. They filled rooms. Uh, but yeah, it goes a long way back. So I was always interested in this kind of thing. And when I did my dissertation on the music theory idea of a schema, I thought that maybe one of the best ways to demonstrate it would be that a computer could recognize these patterns and find these things. And again, since classical versions of categorization defining didn't work very well for human categorization, I thought, well, what's the alternative? And I started looking around, and it turned out that there were early neural network models that were based on similarity, just general similarity. And they seemed to have some promise. And so Jamshid Barucha, working independently, and I, in the mid 1980s, actually published the first neural network papers on music pattern recognition. And I mean, I quickly found that solo lone wolf science in at that level is not sustainable. I mean, you have to have teams and external funding and that sort of thing. But yeah, basically, I worked with people at the Center for Adaptive Systems at Boston University, and we came up with some pretty effective models for categorization of musical patterns using like a MIDI-like input, and they were fairly successful. The problem that I could not solve at that time was the temporal facility that humans have, the ability to imagine something at half speed or double speed or anything like that. That time just think of it as rubato. Humans are amazing at that sort of thing, whereas it's somewhat difficult for computers, or at least was back in the day. So the short answer is that when you make neural network models complicated enough, they become as opaque as the human brain. So that if you get them complicated enough to be practical, they are so complicated that you actually don't know what's going on most of the time. This is not a great outcome for music theory, but I do think that the what we might call the music faking programs should eventually get a lot better. To date, they haven't been very great. I mean, there are uncounted number of computer programs that pretend to compose like Mozart, for example. And they do fool people who don't know very much about Mozart. But I think it's possible now to do quite good training and probably get very close. But I think what it tells us is that it's the human part of it that ultimately is of value to us. In other words, if we could clone a silicon Mozart, would it be of any real value? There's something more to Mozart and his time and place and what he was trying to do than just the ability to write a very nice printer, for example. I think for music education, teaching students how to make these kind of things themselves. I think that has real value for humans to learn how to, express cultural material in real time, like through improvisation or something like that. That's very satisfying for people, and I think that's maybe the direction to go.
Can I ask you a question about language acquisition? So I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of this. For instance, with second languages and native speakers. I was trying to learn French and am working on it, but many people say that vocabulary is the biggest stumbling block, and you need to learn thousands of word families to achieve a certain level of familiarity with the whole thing. So grammar is a certain a part of it. It's a certain important, definitely section, but just the sheer mass of word families that you have to really digest. Is that similar to music in a way?
Some parts of it, yes, I think so. Um, I would make this distinction. If we go, if we define something as, well, let me call it old style linguistics in the sense of Noam Chomsky. He was a great genius. Um, Actually, I don't know if he's still alive. Apologies, Noam, if you are.
He's 96.
Okay. Well, he was a genius of a very high standing, and he revolutionized uh, linguistics in his day, meaning the 1960s and 70s, in large part, 50s, 60s, 70s. Um, it was linguistics allied very much with logic and ideas of mathematics and what could be envisioned in a computer program at that time. If you think of flowcharts in computers, that's sort of how it worked. Um, Today, linguistics has moved on, I believe. Not all of it, and these things are controversial in the field. But I'm very much attracted to what's called construction grammar,
Hmm.
where um, they're very careful to understand how people actually use language. And there's a great sensitivity to the constructions that people employ. Um, James Simmons brought my attention to a classic case where you say something like, it's an accident waiting to happen. Okay, this is a particular construction. And it's not the case that it works with any noun in its noun place or any verb in its verb place. Only certain nouns will work. So it's a disaster waiting to happen. It's a tragedy waiting to happen. You cannot say it's a lettuce waiting to happen. That makes no sense. No native speaker would ever say that because they've learned a combination of meaning and form, and that's the construction. Okay. Constructions are sensitive to collocations, co-locations of things. Okay. So there is, you can buy it, an Oxford collocation dictionary. Okay. And it shows you which words tend to go together more often than they would at random. Like, it's an accident waiting to happen. So anyway, you can ask yourself, how many words does an average English speaker know? And it's not so easy to get that number because people recognize more words than they can recall.
It's like tens of thousands, right? It's 20,000,
Yes,
30,000, something like that.
30,000. Okay. The Oxford Collocation Dictionary has 250,000 entries.
Oof.
So it's worse than you thought. Not only do
English is terrible for this, actually. I feel bad for people who are learning it.
But all languages are like that. In other words, the vocabulary is just like knowing the notes of the scale. It's the collocations that really count. It's how they go together, how the words go together. And when you know the collocations and constructions, then you can begin to use the language in a joking way, in an inventive way, in an ironic way. So, if you will, the constructions of language are like the schemas in music. Okay. If you want to make a joke in 18th century music, you can just have somebody play a bad note. I mean, you might call that low humor. But if you want to do something kind of sophisticated, you would rely on a known pattern that has known implications, and then you would subvert them or defeat them or something, and then come back, like the deceptive cadence, for example. It only works because it's at the end of a cadence where expectation is maximal. And then you come back and you give what was going on the first time. So anyway, this schema concept is just the modern way of thinking about how humans make categories. And the assumption is that 18th century musicians, if you will, one of their greatest inventions was a big repertory of known musical patterns that they could play with. Their patrons knew these patterns. And so when they performed these patterns for their patrons, the patrons could say, that's a nice one of those. They didn't have to have any names for these things.
Yeah.
So, for example, a curtsy at court is still a curtsy, even if you don't have a name for it. Yeah. You know what it is, you know what it does, and you know what it's for. And I think, the audience of that time tended to have that knowledge. Again, very hard to prove.
So, Professor Gjerdingen, this is a great segue into the first question, which is regarding musical phrases, linguistic pattern recognition. Recalling Professor Gjerdingen's analogy comparing language learning to learning musical phrases in earlier episodes, what are your views on the connection between musical and linguistic pattern recognition? Specifically, are exceptional musical pattern recognition skills often accompanied by exceptional language acquisition abilities, or vice versa? Thank you and Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you too, Jay.
Well, taking the last part first, yes, that musicians often have exceptional abilities to pick up languages. Yes, there's quite a bit of evidence that music training increases one's sensitivity to auditory stimuli of any kind, and it may or likely makes language acquisition easier. There are all kinds of ins and outs here. So, for example, people whose native language is a tonal language, let's say Thai or Vietnamese or Chinese or what have you, they may have certain advantages in detecting changes in tonal pitch in music. But even in non-tonal languages, there seems to be an advantage. It's worth saying at the outset that the hardware for listening, whether to music or language, it's the same hardware. We share a great deal of our brain between language and music. Not exactly all the same parts. They are distinct, but there's a tremendous overlap. I mean, not just to mention ears, right? It starts with ears, but even we share the auditory nerves, and a great deal of sound processing tends to take place on the side of the head, the so-called temporal areas. Vision more in the back, and high-level thinking kind of in the front. But music and language overlap quite a bit. Now,
Mm.
somehow we're able to keep them separate. So, for example, when we listen to a song, we can learn the melody, we can learn the words. The understanding the one doesn't block out the other. But yeah, there is evidence that music helps. Um, and you and I and others probably know lots of musicians who are really good at picking up languages.
Mm.
I'm not one of them, but
That's not true. You know
no,
a
no,
ton of languages.
no. I can't speak anything better than a 5-year-old in that language. But um, I have known people who are phenomenal in this way. I mean, there was a guy, Alan Stout, at Northwestern University. He's long passed away. But I remember him telling me about he was great with the Scandinavian languages. And he was on a cruise ship in Norway. And he was speaking with these people. And when they were ready to leave the cruise, they pulled him over and they said, oh, there we go. We're so happy that you spoke with us because hardly anyone knows our local dialect.
Wow.
He, you know, he
He's a
just had
composer, right?
yes, composer,
Mm.
yes, uh, and he had a preternatural ability to pick up on speech patterns
Wow.
and just
Fantastic.
take them on.
Well, there you have it. That's a great answer. Okay, so this one's a fun one. What is Professor Gjerdingen's favorite chord?
Well, first of all, they should spell my name right.
Oh dear.
But
Well, to be
I
fair, you have a difficult last name.
no, I understand. I take full responsibility for that, even though it wasn't my fault. But I tell you, I am a sucker for major and minor seventh chords. And it has nothing to do with the Galant style, but I really do like those chords.
Any particular decade of music that really speaks to you? I mean, like late romantic, early 20th century. Is there anything that's perhaps people would be surprised that you really enjoy?
Oh, absolutely. I'm head over heels in love with Rachmaninoff.
Hmm.
Yes. I just admire him tremendously. And then, of course, I'm a child of the 60s, so to speak. And so pop music from the 60s is, just a great thing. I mean, in September, Sergio Mendes of Brazil 66 died. And really, I had to give him a nod because he was important when I was young. His lead singer, Lanny Hall, was so good that Herb Alpert married her.
Oh,
She, I think she's probably a billionaire now, but she had a fantastic voice. And so, the voice of Mary Travers in Peter, Paul, and Mary. I'm hugely affected by voices like that.
hmm. I used to like that Smothers Brothers singer. There's one of them is a really beautiful voice. That folk thing, I enjoyed his singing a lot.
Oh, absolutely. There was a pair of Hawaiian musicians, the Casimiro brothers, who imitated the Smothers brothers. And the song for my wife is Ku'uipo by them, sung in one of the lounges in Honolulu. But they were terrific musicians.
Right. Well, there you go. You got an insight to Professor Erdogan only on this show, I think. So, okay, let's keep moving on. Any plans to publish a schema-based model composition workbook / textbook or a collection of analyzed pieces?
Oh, wow. No, I hadn't thought of that. It's an interesting idea. Maybe the latter, the collection of analyzed pieces, that might be of use. It's just something I could post, I suppose. I mean, I'm thankful to the music publishing industry and the book publishing industry. They've done a lot for me, but I do think a lot of this material, if it comes out in a $150 edition, is not widely available. You know? So I think there's something to be said for just releasing these things. You know? Of course, it's easy for me to say. I'm beyond tenure and things like that, and for younger scholars that are that need things for a resume, I understand that some things have to be published.
Can I ask
But
do you have a plan for another book in the future?
no, I don't. I tend to think that you might say music theorists are a little bit like mathematicians. They tend to do their best work before their 30s. And I might be a little bit beyond that. So I'm not sure if I have another book in me, but something like that would not be too much heavy lifting, I suppose. I didn't know there was an interest in it.
Well, for me, why don't you do a late romantic schema based book? That would be insane.
That would be interesting. I don't know if I'm up to it though. I mean, it takes a
You're so good at that style of music. You really know, like people know you for the 18th century. They really know you for that. But of course, you child composers. We talk about the Paris Conservatory, of course. But I mean, you need to do maybe a romantic music in the Galant style, if that makes sense. Music in the romantic style.
Well, maybe. I mean, I think, if you look on partimenti.org, especially under harmony, there is a ton of material that is interesting to me, anyway. Let's see what we got here. Well, Maté, these are fabulous realizations of 18th century material. But then, like the lessons of Aimé Le Borgne, I came across that. There's a recent book by Michael Masci on the early days of the Paris Conservatory. Anyway, Le Borgne's work here, what I've done is basically annotated the original manuscript. Because the manuscript itself really tells you what you need. It starts out with some rudiments. And then in 3 parts and later in 4 parts, or 3 or 4 parts, you'll see his 3 times a week lessons for an entire year at the Paris Conservatory. And it's just fascinating to see what he was doing. It's very, very Italian stuff. I mean, if you look at the bass on that page, you're just
oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. The
maybe the lesson 1 or lesson 2.
Well, it doesn't matter. If you look at, I don't know, can you zoom in on the bottom of that?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah. The bottom?
Yeah, you'll see. You see, it's a up a 4th, down a 5th. That kind of thing. Then, let's see. Then it's up a 4th, down a 3rd, up a 4th, down a 3rd. So you see, they're ringing the changes of the Italian movimenti, of the Italian bass motions. And that's not surprising because, well, let's see, if you go to the explaining part before the manuscript starts, it'll say who Le Borgne's teachers were.
Yeah, I think here.
Yeah.
I think one more. Yeah.
Yes, he studied with the harmony with Dulin and Cherubini.
Naples trained Sacchini.
Yes, that is it. There it is.
Durante's favorite student.
Was he? Oh, okay.
Well, he liked him.
No, I bet you're right. And of course, Sacchini was the pet of Marie Antoinette.
Oh, okay.
So when they were setting up the Paris Conservatory, Paisiello and Sacchini were crucial. So, the French might not look at it quite this way, but half of the forces putting together the Paris Conservatory were Italian.
Right.
So anyway, that's a very interesting collection to see day by day somebody going through the harmony course at the Paris Conservatory in the early 19th century.
So to answer the question, no plans for a book, but people should definitely check out partimenti.org.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff there. These harmony books from mid-century, like Savard, Bazin, Ribert, and then the things from the end of the century, Le Nepville, Lavignac. The Lavignac exercises are there both realized and unrealized. Right. So let's see. I think I sent you.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I sent you some Lavignac that might be interested. People find it interesting. It's number 41 from the first book. There we go. So I think it's worth saying that this is from the first book of 3. So there's almost 300 of these things. This is number 40. So this is on the simple side. This is a collection from 1896 that includes examples for students, but then also at the end reproduces things from all the advanced teachers of the time, including Gabriel Fauré, which very interesting stuff. So, listen to this. This is a basse donnée, the BD on the bass line. That means the bass is given and you have to figure out how to add the other 3 parts. So this is Lavignac's personal realization. So we have. Sorry, it's a little slow. Okay, so it's chromatic harmony. And when we get done at the bottom, we have a kind of obbligato. Then we see this is 1896, but the response are the same as it would have been a century before, 151. Printer. Now the bass goes, it could be a Romanesca. But this is late 19th century Paris Conservatory, and so it goes. It's chromatic. But the stuff from earlier, from Italy still works. So Can you see where it says allegretto? I don't know if that's on your version.
Yeah.
Okay, so listen.
Oh wait, maybe I have the wrong one. Let's see. Is that the second one? Oh no.
Oh, I may have left it off. It's okay. It's just the point was that this Fenaroli kind of pattern. So that kind of thing goes on. And then I think the one I did get you, in the middle of the page, it has descending thirds and ascending steps.
I think I found it. Yep.
Yeah, so, down a third, up a step. And altogether, it's got the full complement that you did in the 18th century. So all those skills from, the time of Mozart are still here, but added on to that is a much more complex repertory of new schemas or,
Fantastic.
variations of them.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's move on to the next question here. I'm currently in an undergraduate program looking for master's level music composition programs. I'm currently an undergraduate looking for master's degrees, composition programs. Would you be able to point me in the direction of some programs or faculty currently in academic positions that you know of who teach composition in a way that is historically informed? For in parentheses, Partimento, Schemata, figured bass, improvisation. If nothing comes to mind, could you perhaps provide names of some who aren't in academic positions but offer lessons, a public endorsement? Which, do you have any? I know you've mentioned Tobias Kram in the past, right, for young children. But are there other names you want to mention that would be good teachers for someone like this, or any programs like you was asking, master's level programs?
Yeah, programs. The U.S. is slow to respond. There are, how should I put it? Even if harmony courses are a joke, they're a joke that everybody gets and benefit from. You don't have to learn very much to pass the course. You get to pass the course. The school gets you to pass the course, and therefore it's a victory for them. Now, the fact that you can't write any music in any style, that's considered, well, that's your problem. But I would say Europe is quite a ways ahead of us on this. The Schola Cantorum, Schola Cantorum in Basel, Switzerland, has always been a leader in early music and the teaching of early music performance. I think that's a terrific place. The Conservatory of Amsterdam, they teach half their courses or more in English. There's about 1,000 students there, and they have some world-class early music performers who teach now Job Iserman has retired from there, but his book on harmony and counterpoint and Partimento is a great place to start. What's called the MDW, which is the short version of the University of Music and the Performing Arts in Vienna. That's where that conference was. That would be a terrific place. And there are a number of other schools in Europe that are allied in various ways with the schools I mentioned. Uh, European schools are surprisingly cost effective for American students. I don't think they're free, but given that some American universities are pushing towards six-figure annual
Mm.
costs, uh, the European schools are often a bargain. But the level of activity there is really remarkable, and there's you know uh, whole cadres of people that a person could study with.
Great. So that's a pretty good answer that directly answers that. So how about this one? During the last Christmas interview, Professor Gjerdingen mentioned that he had identified new schemas. Since then, I've been dying of curiosity to know more about them. If possible, could he describe or demonstrate one of them? Thanks in advance. The contribution of both of you to the music community is immense. Well, thank you for sending in the question. So, Professor Gjerdingen, what about those secret schemas you were alluding to in the last interview?
Yeah, no, there are no
Don't
secrets.
try to don't no coast of Norway here. Let's
No, there's no secrets. It's all above board. Um, there was a similar question where somebody asked about shouldn't I update partimenti.org
Oh yeah, yeah.
include to include other schemas that people have come across. So, for example, Nathan Mitchell
Mhm.
uh, and John Rice, and I'm probably overlooking many people. I mean, the coast of Norway does apply here. That is, the closer you look at anything, the more distinctions you notice, and then you have to ask yourself: are they a different category, or are they just a variation of a single category? Um, there was a Galant Schema conference last year, and there was general agreement that there should be a listing that could get updated of 18th century schemas and maybe any kind. Uh, but it seems to have run into the belling the cat problem, where having the thing done is something that everybody can agree with, but no one has quite agreed to do the work. Uh, so if
That's a
one of
tough
your
job.
if one of your listeners might want to take on that job, I think it's open,
Great
and and
contribution. Yeah.
I'd be happy to post things on partimenti.org. But I've always wanted to make partimenti.org as much open source as possible. So, everything, you feel free to steal everything on Partimenti. I encourage it. I think it's been quite successful in China because it's there for the taking.
Yeah, well, you went to China. What was that trip like?
Wow. I mean, uh, I knew that China was big. I mean, anybody does, but I didn't know it was that big. Okay.
Well, to
You
set the
know,
stage, I mean, this is the country that gave Lang Lang. I mean, like this is they really they've produced a lot of virtuos. They take classical music very seriously.
it is, if you just went by numbers, I'd say that China is actually the center of classical music in the 21st century. Uh, they open a new concert hall every week, or did. There were 10 million Europeans between Portugal and Moscow in the time of Mozart. There are 40 million Chinese in Shanghai.
Just Shanghai.
Shanghai. Yeah. I mean, the numbers are really remarkable, but the quality is remarkable too. I mean, if you think about it, being 1 in a million in China doesn't get you all that far because there's 1,000 others ahead of you. So um, the quality of instrumental performance is very, very high.
Well, what about
And
music theory then? So that's the real question then. So is schema? How were you taken? How were you received?
I think positively, although I will say that the Chinese are so masterful at hospitality and making a person feel welcome that they don't let you anywhere near the blowback that must occur when you tell them that Roman numeral harmony is a waste of time. Uh, you know, I I'm sure somebody had a heart attack over that one. And,
In your
so
typical subtle way of saying that, right?
yes, I thought it was appropriate. But again, just because things have always been done in a certain way doesn't mean it makes a lot of sense. Oftentimes, it's more the case that, for the purposes of upper class Europeans at a certain time, music courses were designed for their children to be able to pass them without too much difficulty, because all they wanted was a smattering of knowledge about the field, so that they could talk about it at a cocktail party and maybe hire good musicians. But the idea of actually doing what their musicians were employees that the other upper classes had, and you know the lord of the manor did not aspire to be like their harpsichordist.
Yeah.
That was not part of their job description.
But that's
So,
really good though that you did go to China and provide presentations there on schema. Does it seem like you've planted a seed?
oh yeah, I mean, I think who better than people who grew up in the Chinese Communist Party? Who better to talk to about class, right? And upper class Europeans. I mean, that's all over Shanghai. They still have the French district. They still have the British district, which were once owned by those countries as they exploited China. So the Chinese are willing listeners to the idea about the shortcomings of upper class Europeans. So
Yeah.
so that I think that was received receptively.
Listen,
Uh,
all you need is one TikTok video or whatever they use in China, and if it goes viral, I mean, there's tons of classical people who play classical music. I mean, just Roman numerals. Like, if you, imagine if that just takes off, or something that's catchy. It'll be remarkable. Okay, so let's go on to the next question here. So I'm doing research on Mozart's use of different metrical accentuations within movements, accentuations of surface rhythm and also harmonic rhythm. And how are these used to unify and contrast material in a way that's expressive of the form? My question is, how might an 18th century musician or composer have thought about accentuations of meter and harmonic rhythm? What was taught in that regard?
Well, that's a very well-formed question, and
It's
unfortunately,
a deep
I,
one.
I don't have anything to add to it. As far as I can tell, nothing was written down about rhythm in the Naples conservatories. Uh, I will mention that every exercise, has a dominant rhythm, and so I guess you would absorb those as you went through the various partimenti and solfeggi and whatever. But as for any kind of theory of rhythm or theory of accent or something like that, I've never seen anything about that.
Hmm.
So that doesn't mean it wasn't there, but it has not survived as documentary evidence.
Um, this just brings to mind a question that I had about Riemann. And what did you think of Riemann's, not his harmonic functional talk, but he was very interested in rhythm and upbeats.
Oh yes, Riemann had no shortage of hubris uh, when it came to any topic in music. So let's see, is it his upbeat theory that everything is an upbeat,
Yeah, that's
thing?
what I'm. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, no, it's nonsense.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh. But to be fair to the
Look,
guy, he was a
there's so
very well read person. He was very. In fact, I think he wrote about almost everything. Right? He kind of dabbled in so many different areas. Right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. He was the Ur music professor. You know, he was one of the very first Germans to have an academic position at a major university. And the fact that he made a lot of stuff out of whole cloth didn't seem to bother him or a lot of people at his time. You know, there was so much deference given to German professors that there wasn't much effort to disprove anything that they said.
Hmm. Okay. All right. So I hope that answered the question. It's. Do you have any suggestions? Just going back to that previous question, any areas of research that we could assist with on this? I mean, it seems like it's kind of tough. We don't have anything as means as ways of evidence. But you looked at REPL, and REPL talked about a little bit about form, and Schemata
Oh
has a
yeah,
bit of form. Yeah. Did REPL talk about rhythm as well?
yes. He talks about, and I think this would be characteristic of the 18th century approach, which is to name certain rhythms. I think
Hmm.
one of your questioners
Oh
mentioned
yes.
Lombard rhythm and various things.
Yeah.
Riepel talked about laufers, which are little runners. Um, um, yeah, so I think that would be it. The 18th century tended to name some things, you know, and
Hmm.
Riepel was a great namer. Uh, but I don't think that it doesn't rise to the level of a theory about these things.
Hmm. Okay.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it was just their way of doing it.
Okay. So just you received a bachelor's in composition, music theory, and with regard to your work drawing upon the similarities between language acquisition and fluency in music, would you say that it was born from the examination of pre-existing psychological and neuroscientific literature, which you then extrapolated to music, talking about your very interesting, very you've really covered a lot in your studies and and your education. Were you able to conduct any of your own research? More specifically, how were you able to make your work so scientifically rigorous without a designated degree in science? I ask this not out of skepticism, but because you've inspired me to do something similar.
Well, go ahead and have skepticism. Uh, my my friend Richard Taruskin, rest in peace. He always said that he called it skepsis, but skepticism was a scholar's only defense against self delusion, and I think I think it's really important. Yes, he was, I would argue, the most brilliant musicologist of the late 20th century. Well worth reading on any topic. But anyway, uh, I remember a professor once telling me, he said, if you meet somebody with several advanced degrees in different fields, he said, just run the other way. Uh, uh, a doctorate is a kind of finishing course in how to do research. And once you've learned how to do research, you can apply those skills to any field. Now you have to start at the bottom in the new field, but that's what I did. I mean, I was teaching at Carleton College, but I was taking the calculus series from one of my friends, and I remember I read this one early neural network article about 45 times uh, before I finally figured out the math in it. I mean, I was willing to do whatever it took to be able to understand what was in that article. Um, And I was able to publish peer-reviewed things in Neural Network Journal. Um, but it wasn't easy for me.
Mhm.
I will say that. I had to work really hard at it, even though I knew uh, how to do research. There were some fundamental skills in math, especially, that I lacked and that were cumbersome and difficult for me. I could only go so far.
What is this? I mean, is this providence? I mean, like all these things that you weave together, and it just comes together, and so you just impact in a big way, like music in the Galant style. And so could you give any suggestion, like how to, for anyone in your position, where like a young person who is weaving together different educational backgrounds and different areas of research? Any suggestions?
Well, just be a sponge and take in everything you can from as many different areas as possible. It's worth trying to identify where quality sources are from. But if you can find uh, reliable sources in a field uh, and several fields, and then try and say, well, I have an interest in this, and part of this relates to what that person is studying. Can I put these together in an interesting way? I remember I think it's called the Field Medal in mathematics.
Hmm.
Uh, it's kind of a Nobel Prize to a mathematician under 40 years old, I believe. Um, anyway, if you want to be a lock on the Field Medal, you'll be the person who takes one part of mathematics and combines it with another part in a way that nobody ever saw before. So, like when Descartes uh, did analytic geometry and showed that algebra and conic sections and things like that were different expressions of the same reality. That was a world class move, you know.
Yeah.
And so, don't just tunnel into one thing only. Um, try and reach out and see what's going on. The
Great.
study of the human brain is a really great spot to start, I would say.
Great. Okay. Can you talk a bit about rhythmic vocabulary? And I think another person also joined in on this. It looks like rhythmic vocabulary is something that was assimilated via osmosis for students of antiquity. Given that our context for learning is so reduced in the modern era, I was wondering if any researcher has worked on the rhythmic vocabulary. Lacking rhythmic vocabulary is what had me transition out of jazz research into classical improvisation research in the first place. I was making more incremental progress and was more listenable going down the classical route. But I still haven't come across any system or guiding principles for developing rhythmic freedom and expression. Another rhythmic question.
Yeah, and
And
I'm
I
just
just wanted to quickly add, like you alluded to, you read this add-on as well, speaking about, thank you, A. James 283, talking about the Turkish rhythm, the Lombard rhythm. So what do you think, Professor Gjerdingen, about this? A
yeah,
lot of
no,
people are curious.
I just have to put a lump of coal in another stocking hung on the chimney. I don't know. I think these questioners probably know more about it than I do. And this one that mentions Turkish rhythm and whatever, I think that's a very well designed, well expressed summary of what is known. Uh, so I just can't add anything to it. It's not been a special interest of mine, um, and I hope somebody can enlighten us about these things.
um, I know, Professor Yerdigan, did you read that really long question by Joshua? It had math in it. It had functions. I don't know if you got a chance to read Joshua's second question.
Yes, well, I told you about
It's
my
Joshua. It's so long, I can't even fit it on the screen. But Professor Yerdigan, you're quite math savvy and computer savvy. What did you make of that question?
well, no, I think he was talking about what might be an appropriate data structure to for a computer to make propositions about musical things. And that is a very interesting question. I mean, for example, if you were making a computer program about galant music, should your computer program have absolute pitch? If the answer is yes, then the result may be different than a computer program that only has relative pitch. You know, that's a fundamental distinction. So when you try and set up data structures, it can be a very good exercise to try to help determine what you think the fundamental elements are. I remember I was writing a computer program on a little Apple Macintosh, the very first kind. You know, it looked like
Apple One?
Yeah, well, no, not Apple One. It was Mac One.
Okay.
Model 000001. This was 1984. And later, a couple of years later, I was at Harvard, and I happened to be living in one of the so-called houses. Oh, it's not that. No.
Oh, maybe it's the Apple II.
No. It's not Apple. It's Mac.
Oh, Macintosh. Okay, sorry.
Macintosh,
the first Macintosh, yeah.
Yeah, the very first Macintosh. There it was. Yep. So I was on a fellowship year at Harvard, and I was at one of these gigantic houses, which are dormitories, but they're beyond dormitories. I mean, they have a resident master and their own cafeteria or dining hall, and I mean they have an all-night waltz night with an orchestra. I mean, it's a whole different level from what I experienced in a dormitory. But anyway,
it's very classy.
Just by absolute chance, I was living up the same stairwell where David Lewin had lived as a freshman himself at Harvard. And so I had him over just to chat one afternoon. He was a very generous person, really wonderful, wonderful guy. And, you know, we didn't do very similar kinds of work. He had been a math genius and was a junior fellow at Harvard, which is a very, very high fellowship that they give only to their very best students. And he always took a kind of mathematical approach to things musical. But I was doing this program that was designed to kind of recognize patterns in MIDI things. And I asked him what features he thought were crucial in music. And he looked at me and he said, "Bob, I don't do features." It was hard to continue the conversation at that point. But I think what it meant was that he wasn't interested in perception per se. That was not where he began. He thought of, you know, the notes on the page as like numbers, as mathematical entities, and not psychological things. Mm-hmm. So that, you know, that itself, in relation to this posting that we're talking about, that itself is a central issue. Mm-hmm. You know, okay. That are the things to be represented. You know, do we imagine them as things in the world, or do we imagine them as things that we perceive in the world? So, you know, for some people, music theory involves a bunch of gears and wheels and kind of iron, firm things. I think what we hear in music is more like shapes in clouds. So let's say you and your friend are lying on your back on a hilltop and you're looking up at the clouds, and one of you says, "That looks like a duck." And then you say, "Yeah, it does look like a duck." I would say that is as real as musical objects get. It's good enough. You know, if there's intersubjectivity, if a group of people can look at something and say, yeah, it looks like a duck, then that thing is a duck or a printer. Okay. But there's quite a different school of music theory that would say, no, that's a cloud. There's no duck there. And
Great.
so, my response to data structures like that is that data structures are wonderful ways to reveal what you think is really important.
Okay, so approximately what percentage of Galant schema were already used in early Baroque, pre 1700 music?
Okay, pre 1700. Um, in Italy, okay, so it makes a difference where we're talking about. If we're talking about Greenland, it's 0. Okay, so it does make a difference. So if we're talking Southern Europe, I would say 50%. Now, I'm hoping that nobody can say that I'm wrong, because this is really loose. At one of the questions I think could be reinterpreted to ask, what are some interesting research questions? And certainly schemas in Southern Europe in the 1600s would be a really interesting research question. We do have tons of music from that time, but it's not simple. And it doesn't help that, I called Taruskin the greatest musicologist of the late 20th century, maybe from the 1970s on. He was preceded by Karl Dahlhaus, who was the greatest post-war musicologist, I think. He had quite a different career. His first job was suggested to him by Bertolt Brecht. I mean, I don't get anywhere near those circles at any point in my career. But anyway, Karl Dahlhaus called the 17th century, the 1600s, the no longer but not yet. And that's because in his life, there was 16th century counterpoint and there was 18th century counterpoint. Nobody ever took a course in 17th century counterpoint in North America, at least, because we didn't know what to do with it. It's very messy. If it's believable, I think harmony is more complex in the 17th century than in the 18th century. In the 18th century, things clarify quite a bit. If you think about the rule of the octave in Partimenti, the rule of the octave makes almost every note in the bass either tonic or dominant.
Yeah.
With one spot for a subdominant. But, things are clarified tremendously and simplified.
Great. Okay. Hello, Nikhil. I was looking at your brilliant analysis. Thank you. This is my favorite question, I think, of Bach's Minuet in G, and notice that measures 5 to 8, and especially measures 13 to 16, fa mi re do, and the soprano over 2-1-7-1 bass. There is a very recurring pattern in Baroque and Galant music, something similar to a minor printer, but ending in a major cadence. If it's not too much trouble, could you ask Professor Gjerdingen if those sequences would fit into any specific schema? Thanks.
Okay. That piece is sometimes attributed to Petzold.
Petzold,
right?
yes, Christian Petzold.
But it doesn't matter. It's a very nice little piece.
Yeah.
It begins with a version of what John Rice calls the Hearts, named after Daniel Hartz, where it sort of goes one and then, da 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 bum bum ba bum bum. There's a lot of printer in what continues, but it's not brought out in terms of the phrases of the piece. It just sort of drifts down. Yeah, from the E da da da, E, that could be a D in the middle of that chord, but it's not played. Then C, B, and then gets down to A in the middle. It's a kind of weak printer. You see the bass after in measure 3 goes 4, 3, 2, 1. And then there's a bit of that beginning in measure 11 again, where, the melody repeats. I don't think there's anything really special about that or different, really. Nothing pops out at me other than, if you look at measure 13, you have a melody on the downbeat that goes 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. And then in the bass, you have 7 to 1. And then, at the very end of the melody, 7 to 1. It's a loose reformulation of the double cadence. So, the old version would be. But here we have. As a more modern take on. That would be my comment there.
Okay. All right. With regard to Partimento, schemata, and figured bass as a pedagogical tool, please tell me if you would agree with the following. 1, composition and improvisation are intuitive processes. 2, intuitive processes can only be enhanced through exercise or repetitious exposure. And 3, the proper practice of Partimento, figured bass, and schemata require that a musician work through a series of musical instances, which results in the relegation of certain contrapuntal and harmonic principles and common vocabulary down to a level that allows them to be employed intuitively in the same way that a musician picks up on and can mimic certain musical tendencies found within the music they listen to until they've been internalized. Partimento, figured bass, and schemata are essentially more distilled versions of this, and that they are otherwise the same musical instances one would hear while listening to music, only reduced to their most necessary parts, which lends them to be more easily exercised. Would you agree with those 3 points?
I don't know. I mean, much depends on what the meaning of intuitive is. I mean, the sentiment is attractive, and I think it follows how a lot of people think about things like improvisation or whatever. But, one person's intuitive is another person's calculated, but meant to look intuitive. Okay. I mean, if you think about how jazz players speak to the media, they never say, well, I studied the Jimmy Ebersold pattern books for about 25 years, 8 hours a day. And then I pick things out of that and I play them in my set. They never say that. They say, oh man, it just comes to me. I mean, I feel it. It comes to me.
I've met a few people of the Jamie Ebersold variety at Berkeley. Yeah, very popular backing tracks.
Oh yeah, well, sure. I'm being silly, but no, I think there's much in what they say. I mean, I think both in jazz and in Partimento improvisation, you need a rich repertory of patterns that you've learned and overlearned. I mean, you have to learn so that you think what you want to do, and then the hands and whatever else, it just takes it and goes with it. And I think sometimes when you achieve a certain level, it does seem like things just come to you in the moment. I think there's been an awful lot of good work on jazz improvisation. There's really no corresponding work on classical improvisation.
Are you talking about scholarship or just the music that has developed over the last century?
No, I mean scholarship.
Okay.
Scholarship. There is quite a bit of jazz scholarship
Hmm.
on, and obviously in jazz, people are going to talk about improvisation in some way or another.
Hmm.
In classical music, maybe French organ improvisation is one of the last surviving areas, and I actually don't know of any studies
Hmm.
on the work. I mean, there have been books written about it, but
Yeah.
they're more about how to do it rather than uh,
Yeah.
about it.
So you actually mentioned this earlier. Are you updating the schemas classification on the website? It doesn't seem like that, but you're making it more open source, right? The website for people to add materials. But what are the plans for Partimenti.org? Can you share what you have, your future plans?
Um,
But maybe I don't want to take away. He asked a question. Do you have future plans to update the musical schemas classification with newer schemas? So yes or no?
I think I agree. At last year's schema conference, there was a general agreement that it was a good idea to do that. But
Yep.
I didn't want to do it myself because I didn't want people to
Okay.
think that, that I own schemas. I mean, this
Well, you are the
schema.
schema pope, though, in a way, right?
Well, I'm
This
the.
is your ecumenical council, I suppose.
Oh, no. I, I'm an advocate. Certainly, I'm an advocate, and I'm certainly heartened to see a lot of scholars and also performers get interested in this material, because I do think it gives them a certain entry point to start actually thinking a little bit like a Galant musician, and in some cases, a lot like a Galant musician. I mean, you should have heard some of these people in Vienna at the conference, and I think you showed the links.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, some of these they were at the harpsichord mostly, but some of these realizations were just beautiful, really beautiful. You know.
Right. Okay. So, and just a quick question: what's your immediate plan for Partimenti.org? Do you have? And I'm saying, do you have particular PDFs that you have planned in the near future to upload?
I'm always putting up things. I mentioned that Laborn piece.
Yep.
The Juilliard School asked for, Job Iserman edited a collection of 150 Kotumachi solfeggi.
Mm.
It's the only collection I know where it goes from dead simple to ridiculously complicated, step by step. So it's very valuable. I had put it in modern clefs, and the Juilliard School, which has an amazing early music group, wanted it in soprano clef.
Oh, is this the
So,
one? I don't know if this is the one, but you said 100. No,
well,
maybe
it's
not.
on
I think this is.
it's on
Okay.
Partimento.org.
Let me go to that.
It's in the solfeggi collection. Yeah.
Okay, so Veggie, the collections, Kotomachi.
Kotumachi, and then you get two choices: treble clef, soprano clef.
Right.
It seems like a small thing, but actually putting together 150 of these takes
I
a
can
little while.
imagine. Can I ask you your old website? I'm sure people are familiar with the old one.
I should just add.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't help but mention that the third button is an 18th century manuscript, probably originally by Kotumachi, but it takes 30 of his solfeggi from the previous collection and gives him accompaniments.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So, if you can think of the 150 as chant donné, as given melodies, and then if you want to test your 18th century accompaniment chops, then 30 of them are accompanied.
Wow. And how authentic are they? Who are they by? Are they from Kotomachi himself?
I don't know. I think they're believed to be by Kotumachi, but from playing through them all, I think they are absolutely 18th century. Although, maybe someday there'll be Partimento Solfeggio fakes. I'd be easily fooled, I think.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
these are as good as good as they get.
And David Douglas, thank you for the question. Unidentified schemas. This has been addressed, but can it what do you see for the future of schema identification here? Um, one thing that's interesting is I think your endorsement of a schema that somebody comes up with would be quite significant, I believe, because I think the way you think about music is quite special, and I think it'd be great if scholars kind of get it in a way, like get the whole thinking. It's quite subtle, and uh, are we is it, how do we prevent just anything being labeled schema, such to the point where everything is a schema, and then now we have nothing. It's just information is just kind of meaningless at that point. Oh, that's a schema. This is a schema. Everything's a schema.
I do think that technology will give us. I mentioned James Simmons' work. He did not go into academia, but he was a very talented statistician, and I think there will be increasing tools like that where we can, ask an empirical question about how common is this pattern in this repertoire, and maybe someday it'll become clear that there's a certain threshold that needs to be met. That, how should I put it? It's a very interesting intellectual question. How can music be always different, but always same enough so that we could understand it? If you want originality, it's very easy to produce, but nobody can understand what you did. So, in music, the trick is to be original and yet not be original. There's some kind of line that you have to surf for it to, be appreciated by a large segment of the population, or even a regional.
As far as cognition, how is it that some composers make almost iconic music, and then when you listen to it, you don't even think about the schema? It's so arresting. But what are the elements there cognitively that make it special? That is, oh, this is not just another Romanesca. This is what happens there. Like, is there like we were talking about elements and features, but like, how does that happen? I mean, why is there one particular Romanesca that is just blows the rest away? And how what's the case for that? What's the explanation for that?
Oh, I don't have any kind of simple explanation for that. It's like, what is magic? I think it's worth saying that when we're talking about classical music, we're talking about centuries old tradition that every so often produces an artist who is able to do things with it that no one really thought of doing before. A Beethoven kind of character, a Bach kind of character, a Mozart. These are very, very rare, and that's why we should honor them and try and preserve them to the extent possible.
Yeah,
but it's they're not the crazy ones. That's worth pointing out.
They tend to have very frail health, what I've noticed.
Well, that could be. There was, by the middle of the 19th century, there wasn't a single direct descendant of Bach alive.
Yeah.
That's amazing, even though he had a gigantic family.
Yeah.
So, this is a better time to be alive in terms of getting COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Professor Gjerdingen, thank you so much. We only have two more questions. I really thank you for your being so generous with your time, and let's do the last two. Thank you for this question. In an unfigured partimento, for example, if we see a down a third, up a step pattern that is not repeated, would a partimentist think of this as a moti del basso, or would they instead think in terms of the elementary scale degree rules for steps and leaps given by Fenaroli? The latter guarantees tonal coherence or idiomatic harmony. At heart, what I'm wondering is whether the moti del basso or the marche harmonique patterns were used purely for transitional sequential passages that occur, for example, after a cadence in an invention of a fugue, or whether they were used more broadly to harmonize one non-repeated disjunct bass motions. Very, very good question.
Yes, I don't think there's a all or one or the other answer here. It very much depends on the context in which that third is. So, let's say we have a third. If we were in a C major context, that's going to be recognized as and the first chord is 6, but it's not the down a third, up a step pattern. So the question falls to the pattern perception of the player. How is the player going to take that? And one of the interesting research projects that one could take, for example, would be to look at partimenti by Stanislav Mate, of which there are hundreds, and then to look at the 100 or so that he has harmonized. There's enough data here that you could, in a way, answer that question, at least for the case of Mate. And Mate is important because he taught Donizetti, he taught Rossini, and his student Christian Weinlich taught Richard Wagner. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, and Clara Schumann. So I would look at a repertory like that, or the Lavagnac at the end of the 19th century. But Mate is a little bit easier because it's not fully into the later 19th century. It's more of the Beethoven era.
Right. Okay. And the final question. Thank you so much for doing these questions, Professor Gjerdingen. Can you provide a list of sources or any insight regarding schemata or partimento specifically dedicated to modulation? Likewise, would you also be able to provide sources or insight regarding both chromatic counterpoint and diminution, as well as chromatic schemata and partimento? Generally speaking, any sources which take the partimento schemata model and alter them chromatically in a way symptomatic of the late Romantic era. Everyone loves the Romantic era, and we love the idea of partimento's adaptability and development into the 19th century. So, what do you have to say to that?
Well, I've been remiss in not posting some of the late 19th century Italian collections of partimenti. There's a collection by Dinardis, which is quite good. I mean, typically they have Durante and Fenaroli and things like that, but they also do a lot of late 19th century. So there's the Dinardis collection. But more generally, I would refer people to the mid-19th and late 19th century Paris Conservatory work, because the center of gravity of influence shifted from Italy to Paris in the 19th century. And so if you want to understand the Milan Conservatory in the 1880s, it's probably more efficient just to understand the Paris Conservatory at that time, because Milan was imitating what Paris was doing.
Okay, great. Well,
But these collections do exist.
um, maybe we could end off. We were chatting before with the broadcast, the show. We were talking a little bit about Franz Liszt, and I'm on a big Liszt kick, essentially reading his biography. And what a figure! I mean, what a towering figure of the 19th century. Best friends with Chopin, best friends with Wagner. In his own way, a very path-breaking composer. There's that quote by Wagner to, I think, Boulez or someone saying that he was influenced by Liszt's compositions as well. I mean, you had something interesting to say about his transcendental etudes, right, Professor Gjerdingen?
Well, yes, they're among the many piano works that I can't play. But as a as an admirer of Liszt, uh, there's if you want an interesting afternoon, it is to compare the first version of these, which still come out of the Paris piano virtuoso school. So Kalkbrenner, Pixis, Hertz, uh, Moscheles, Thalberg, that whole crowd. The first version of his transcendental etudes are that way, and they include quite a number of galant schemas. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, as you can imagine, there's all kinds of sequences going
Yeah.
on. Uh, Liszt rewrites these pieces, and so the better known, more frequently played version is from the 1850s rather than the
Hmm.
1830s. And the Galant material is either missing or so deeply um, hidden that it's like it's gone. Also, the
Hmm.
textures are changed very much. If you think of Parisian piano school, the typical texture is not unlike late Mozart, like Mozart piano concertos. You have a fast, fleeting right hand part, um, occasionally in double thirds, uh, and relatively simple accompaniments. When you get to the rewriting of the Transcendental Etudes, then you have the great 19th century piano texture of you might call it uh, a broad range, from one end of the keyboard to the other, and a lot of it happening simultaneously. So it's very interesting to see them, but it is kind of the between the two versions, there's an eclipse of Liszt using these
Hmm.
18th century patterns.
Yeah, I actually I did want to you never really talk about serialism and atonal and 20th century composition. I mean, I get you hinted about it jokingly about it in previous interviews, but in the 60s, I mean, really the early 20th century, that there was a really strong urge for people who are composition majors or just composers to be pushed in a very modernist direction, and serialism, Boulez, and even before that, Schoenberg. There's a lot of,
I
and
was
these are
there.
not these, and these were not untalented people. These were geniuses. Many of these were very
Oh,
talented. Boulez,
absolutely.
I mean, Boulez is as a talent is huge. Um, but like I just want your comment on that whole period, and just like what you make of that. I mean, it was a kind of a crazy time. I mean, really path breaking, insane, some beautiful things, but it happened, and what do we make of that? I mean, we can't pretend it never happened.
No, it never happened. Yeah, I mean, it did happen, and yet culturally, it sort of didn't happen. I mean, mid-century modern furniture is all the rage now. I mean, it's very valuable. Mid-century modern music, nobody even knows that they don't like it. It's you're absolutely right. It was this brilliant group of lemmings running off a cliff, and yeah, I was there. Uh, these were the best and brightest. These people could uh, Oh, I mean, there were performers like the Kantarsky brothers. You could throw a bucket of paint on the wall and they could play it. You know, they they, they were truly amazing, and they wanted to branch out into a brave new world. You know, this idea of pattern-based music, and I mean, Schoenberg and his generation, they'd gotten sick of it. You know, Schoenberg arranged like 1,000 pages of small orchestral music for clubs and theaters in Vienna. They knew this stuff like the back of their hand, but they really got tired of it, and they thought there was this brave new world that they would reach out and you know, maybe it sounds awful right now, but the world is going to catch up to us.
But
That was the thing.
to play devil's advocate, you it has expanded the soundscape, right? So, like for instance, if we hear horror music or certain expressionist film, it does take that, and you would almost feel like it's appropriate for certain imagery and this we're talking about aesthetics now. It's not like maybe nobody's whistling it down the street, but certainly but certainly it has affected art, right? In sort of the like it has an influence for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But of course, that was achieved by 1910. That's a time before your great grandfather. So it's it's taken us a long time to be able to view it historically, I think.
I have one thing which is I really don't know much about modern classical music. Who are the Liszts, the Mozarts, the Chopins of today? I'm sure they're there, and I'm sure they're constrained by the certain economies of this and like for instance, I know Chopin when Chopin came on the scene, he was a breath of fresh air. He was just so new and he was just fresh. And I'm all for learning all the techniques that we have. Like I think Partimento is absolutely perfect, absolutely perfect. But there's always that urge, right, to be original and to push things and to have what is modern classical music? What should the sound be now in 2024? I mean, do we play with odd time signatures? Do we explore like Messiaen and play with that? Maybe mix that with a bit of like 18th century music and a bit of neoclassicism. Like, what does that look like? I have no idea what modern classical music is or should sound like.
Yeah, no, I'm no seer. I'm no prognosticator. Um, there's a lot of interesting music in films now, and I think for most people that is their experience of symphonic music. Very unlikely that they would, you know, attend a symphony concert in the first place, and then to actually attend and hear a piece of new music. Very remote. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I think as we look back on the 20th century, for example, um, I would tend to rate somebody like George Gershwin as extraordinarily high. You know, there's certainly people like Stravinsky, Ravel, Rachmaninoff, but out of, from their point of view, out of nowhere comes somebody like George Gershwin, and you know, rechanges how people hear things.
Mhm.
So the Beatles may have had that effect. Um, maybe today it's Taylor Swift. I don't know.
Well, 2025 is around the corner. Very exciting things. Final, do you want to mention? Is there anything happening in 2025 that people should be aware of in terms of scholarship, conferences, or any big plans?
Hmm. Let's see. I get I get the Pascal Medal of the British Society of Music Analysis in 2025 in July in
Wow.
Manchester, England. So I mean that's a very personal announcement, but kind of nice.
Very good. Very good. Is the is the American SM Society of Music Theory, is that like the Academy Awards of music theory in a way?
I guess you'd call it that, or Grammy. Maybe.
The Grammys. Wonderful. Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, Professor Gjerdingen, and thank you for answering the questions. Thank you for being so generous with your time. It's really exciting to see what's going to happen next year. We have no idea what will happen, but we just know that there's so many. I recognize some of the names of the questions. There's some tons of undergraduates, people who are excited about this, and I'm just thrilled, and we owe you a lot for the work and you and your fellow scholars have done, but specifically you. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome, and Happy New Year to all.
Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you to everyone for tuning in.